The year 1983 was marked by an unforeseen incident that cast a long shadow.
In 1998, defense attorney Mike Mears was preparing for a death penalty case in Georgia when he stumbled upon a revelation that would shake the foundations of the state's execution system. His client, Timothy Carl Dawson, faced capital punishment, and Mears was determined to prove that the electric chair constituted cruel and unusual punishment. As part of his strategy, he filed a legal discovery request, compelling the Georgia Department of Corrections to hand over all relevant documentation related to executions. What he received wasn't just paperwork. It was a collection of 23 audio tapes. These were no ordinary recordings. They were confidential, systematic audio logs of every electrocution carried out by the state since 1983. For over 15 years, Georgia had secretly documented the final moments of death row inmates with chilling precision. And now, for the first time, someone outside the prison system had access. The tapes captured everything: the metallic click of the straps locking into place, the nervous murmurs of officials, the last words of the condemned, the electrical surges, and the horrifying bodily reactions that followed. These were not sanitized records. They were raw, unfiltered, and deeply disturbing. Later, these recordings would be made public through the efforts of radio producer David Isay, lifting the curtain on what had long been hidden behind prison walls. But among all the recordings, one stood out, louder, longer, and more disturbing than the rest. It was the botched execution of Alpha Otis Stevens, Georgia's third execution in 1984. What should have been a brief and controlled procedure turned into a prolonged and agonizing death. The audio captured it minute by minute, a full 19 minutes of failed electrocution, where Stevens survived the initial jolt and continued to show signs of life. This wasn't just an execution gone wrong. It was a moment that would become a cornerstone in the debate over capital punishment in America. Stevens's death, and the tape that recorded it, would soon be cited in courtrooms and legislative halls across the country. And for the first time, the public would hear not just about the death penalty, but what it actually sounded like. Alpha Otis Stevens was no stranger to the law. In 1974, at the age of 29, he escaped from Houston County Jail in Georgia. A fugitive on the run, Stevens quickly resumed a violent path. Alongside an accomplice, he broke into the home of Roy Asbell in Twiggs County. They caught Asbell by surprise, stole a .357 Magnum revolver, and forced him into his own vehicle. From there, Stevens drove Asbell to a secluded shed, a place that would become the site of his cold-blooded execution. He shot him twice at point-blank range. Stevens was apprehended the very next day in Savannah. The charges stacked up fast: murder, armed robbery, kidnapping. During questioning, Stevens not only confessed to the killing of Roy Asbell, but also admitted to an earlier murder committed in 1973. There was no doubt about his guilt, but what followed was a legal process steeped in the rigid mechanics of capital punishment. In January 1975, a Georgia jury sentenced him to death. Over the next 9 years, Stevens waited on death row. He filed 5 separate appeals, all denied. At each stage, the system reaffirmed the sentence, showing no interest in revisiting the conditions under which Stevens would be put to death. By late 1984, his legal options had run dry. The governor refused to grant clemency. The execution date was set for December 12, 1984. In the final hours before midnight, preparations began inside Georgia's death chamber. Witnesses were assembled. Officials ran through their final checklists. Stevens, now a graying man who had spent nearly a decade in a 6x9-foot cell, was brought into the room. He was strapped into the electric chair, Georgia's chosen instrument of justice. At exactly 12:18 a.m., the countdown began. The room was silent save for the voice over the intercom. Count of 3. Press your button. 1, 2, 3. The current surged. Stevens jerked once, then he went still. For a moment, it seemed the execution had gone according to plan. But within seconds, doubts began to creep in. Officials noted subtle movements, his head tilting, slight shifts in posture. Something wasn't right. Stevens wasn't dead. The execution chamber, once quiet, began to fill with unease. Observers noted that Stevens was still moving, his head gently swaying from side to side. Initially, the motions were dismissed as post-mortem muscle spasms. But as the seconds ticked into minutes, the reality became harder to ignore. Stevens was still alive. A voice on the recording stated almost clinically, "He appears to be relaxing. Slight movement from the condemned's head. He seems to be breathing." The officials in the room, bound by protocols, did not act immediately. Instead, they initiated the lapse time phase. 5 minutes meant to allow the body to stabilize and be checked for vital signs. But even during this window, Stevens continued to show signs of life. By 12:20 a.m., 1 minute into the lapse time, he was still moving. 2 minutes in, more subtle signs, head bobbing, faint breath sounds, persisted. The countdown continued. 3 minutes, 4, 5, and still no clear sign of death. A physician entered to conduct a vital check. His conclusion was chilling. He's still breathing. The audio captures a flurry of subdued confusion. "Do you want to check him or go through it again?" one voice asks. "Check him and then go through it again," comes the reply. Despite the mounting horror, there's an eerie calm in the room. Procedures are followed. Emotions are suppressed. No one raises their voice. At 12:26, the execution team prepared for a second round. The superintendent was instructed to inform the witnesses that the process would continue, due to vital signs remaining. But the message was delayed. The witnesses, many of whom had already watched what they believed was a completed execution, were now being told, without explanation, that they would see it happen again. The second electrocution began at 12:28 a.m. 1, 2, 3, the voice repeated. A jolt, a violent jerk, then silence again. However, almost immediately, the same signs began to emerge. Stevens's head moved, his chest rose slightly. The execution had failed for a second time. As the second round of electricity coursed through Alpha Otis Stevens's body, the same grim pattern repeated. A single, violent jolt, a momentary stillness, then movement. Not spasms, not twitching, but signs of life. The execution team, bound by rigid procedure and cold detachment, began narrating the process in mechanical tones. His head is still moving, appears to be breathing, 15 seconds remaining in the third phase. Despite having already endured 2 full surges of high-voltage current, Stevens had not succumbed. In the control room, there was rising concern about the integrity of the equipment. One voice suggested checking the sponges and electrical connections, implying something wasn't functioning correctly. However, the decision was made. Complete the full cycle first, then investigate. The final 5-minute lapse period began again. Officials monitored Stevens closely, narrating his every twitch like data points in a lab. He appears to have stopped moving. No activity from the condemned. Still no motion detected. It was as if the witnesses were desperate to confirm what their procedures required them to see. Death. Yet even now, no one in the room seemed fully confident that Stevens was gone. There was no moment of solemnity, no expression of gravity or regret, only silence, clipboards, and checklists. It was the very image of institutionalized detachment, where death is carried out not with cruelty but with numb repetition. At 12:37 a.m., 2 minutes into the lapse phase, a voice reported again, "I do not detect any movement." Then, at minute 3, still nothing. 4 minutes, no change. And finally, after 5 long minutes, the announcement came. Stand by for the physician's check. 2 doctors entered the execution chamber. The first examined Stevens for signs of life, then the second. All eyes were on the chair, on the man who had already endured what should have been an instant death twice. The recording captures the tension as time slows to a crawl. And then, at 12:37 a.m., the declaration, the condemned was pronounced dead.
The future will be a series of choices, not a single destination. the subtle shift in posture, a detail that revealed a life stubbornly clinging on.